I can't find my way.
It's okay. I'm right here to help.
Are you lost?
Minneapolis in a whiteout. Julian Cross, the blue-eyed AI CEO in a flawless suit, steps from the glass skyway and freezes. An 8-year-old clutches a dented harmonica, whispering, "I can't find Mom." His hearing aid is dead. The wind knives through. Julian wraps his scarf around the boy, thumb hovering over his phone. Tonight, algorithms meet mercy. If he follows those notes, what will he uncover? The city had been stripped to bone and breath, a white roar swallowing Nicollet Mall and the river that usually moved like a slow lung under the bridges. Julian Cross stepped from the glass skyway into the sharpened evening, the air so cold it felt moral. His phone still hummed with the aftertaste of a hostile takeover call, voices too smooth, phrases too precise, a chess match where compassion was a wasted piece. The snow kept falling, hard and fine, pricking his cheeks and clinging to the lashes behind his designer glasses. He adjusted his tie the way he always did after bad news, 2 fingers smoothing silk as if order could be willed back into the room. The prestigious watch at his cuff ticked a muted, private rhythm. On another night he would have crossed into the heated garage, let the driver pull onto the cleared lane that tunneled through the city's exhaustion. Instead, he stopped at the edge of the skyway's door and watched the winter claim the streets. Sirens pancaked sound against buildings. Buses crabbed sideways on black ice, brake lights stuttering red across the snow. The river was a dark muscle under powder, a frozen cord stretched tight and quiet. Offices along the mall were ghost-lit. Cleaning crews, late meetings, rows of ergonomic chairs waiting for the next day's posture. He could still hear the phrase from the call, "Optimize for shareholder certainty." The words had landed like glass. Certainty had been his currency since childhood. He translated mess into models, fear into graphs, and loneliness into work that the world called visionary. Ethermind's headquarters rose above him like a controlled verdict in glass and steel. But tonight, control looked like a cage wrapped in snow. Julian tucked his hands into the pockets of his overcoat and stepped down onto the plaza. The wind slid under the hem, wild and sly, and he felt his body answer with a shiver he usually outran. A pair of teenagers hurried past, scarves iced with breath, their laughter bright and reckless. From the far side of the intersection, a woman in a fluorescent vest braced against the gusts, salt scattering from a plastic scoop like sparks. Life kept moving through the ache of it. It always did. He took out his phone and typed a message to his chief of staff, then deleted it. The takeover could wait a few hours. His eyes lifted to the big screen, 2 buildings over, looping the day's weather bulletin. Wind chill advisories pulsed across the corner like a heartbeat. Warming centers open. Check neighbors. Watch for frostbite on the young and elderly. He blinked snow from his lashes and thought of the truth he never said aloud. He had built an empire fluent in prediction, and still, he could not name the last time he had been surprised by anything but a storm. His driver idled near the curb, window half down. "Sir?" "Give me 10, Julian said, voice even. "Take the long loop. I want to walk." He set off along the edge of the plaza, where the wind scoured footprints flat within minutes. He passed the stone benches no one sat on in weather like this, the dormant planters, a newspaper box with a frozen front clinging to a headline about layoffs at a manufacturer 2 suburbs south. He had read the story earlier, tracking the families behind the numbers. He had not known what to do, only that it mattered beyond quarterly briefs. The watch ticked again, a small halo of sound inside his sleeve. He glanced at the river and imagined the under-ice current, slow, patient, carrying memories of summer between banks now crusted white. He pictured the city's arteries, bus routes, pedestrian tunnels, skyways, threaded with needs the system recognized and those it missed, a kid who forgot gloves, a nurse leaving a double shift at midnight, a heater dying in a walk-up just before dawn. Snow skated off the angles of his coat as he reached the crosswalk. The signal chirped, a thin electronic bird, and he stepped forward into the gust. Every sense narrowed to breath. Cold. Step. Halfway across, in that odd silence storms sometimes create, he realized he could hear his own heart. At the opposite curb, he paused under the awning of a shuttered cafe and cupped his hands around his mouth, breathing warmth into his fingers. His reflection hung in the dark glass. Blue eyes steady, hair disciplined. The tailored rectangle of a man who did not belong to weather. The image felt like an alibi. "Optimize, for certainty," he murmured, almost laughing. The wind stole the sound. He looked down the block, past the drifted bus stop and the blown-open newspaper bin, and felt the smallest tug inside, like a compass finding north after being jarred. It was nothing yet, just a pull, a question that rose without words. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned toward it, letting the watch's soft tick keep time with his steps as the city whispered through snow of things that could still be changed. Snow hissed sideways through the plaza like static, wrapping the city in a kind of ghost light. Julian crossed between stalled cars, his breath pluming in steady bursts. The sound of sirens had faded into the distance. Somewhere behind him, a city bus struggled up the incline, its tires whining against ice. He drew his coat tighter and started toward the corner when movement caught his eye. Something small, half hidden beside the steps of an empty fountain. A boy, maybe 8 years old. Puffy coat zipped to his chin, hood lined with fake fur, face pale against the wind. He stood alone under a flickering street lamp, clutching a dented tin harmonica and a brown paper bag folded at the top. For a second, Julian thought he was waiting for someone. Then he saw the boy's lips move, the words swallowed by the storm. He tried again, barely a whisper. Julian stepped closer. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" The boy flinched, startled, then pressed the harmonica to his chest. His mouth moved again, but no sound came. Then he raised both hands, small chapped fingers tracing hesitant signs in the air. Julian froze, realizing the boy wasn't ignoring him. He couldn't hear him. The child fumbled with something near his ear, a small gray hearing aid, its light dead. The batteries were gone, drained by the cold. He mouthed the words slowly, exaggerating each one. "Can't. Find. Mom." Julian's pulse kicked. He looked around. The plaza was nearly empty. A few cars skidded past, drivers hunched forward, wipers scraping rhythm. The wind screamed around the glass towers. No adult was near. He crouched to the boy's eye level, pulled out his phone, switched to the Notes app, and typed in bold letters. "I'm safe. With you. What's Mom's name?" Then he turned the screen toward him. The boy blinked, understanding, and tapped the harmonica twice against his glove. "Okay," Julian said quietly, guessing the tap was a kind of answer. He typed again. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then pointed to the paper bag. Julian opened it carefully. Inside were 2 spare hearing aid batteries, a granola bar, and a folded paper with crayon writing, "Theo." Julian exhaled. Slow. "Theo. All right, Theo." He looked toward the intersections. Snow was coming harder now, slicing visibility to nothing. His driver's SUV was somewhere down the block, but headlights blurred to ghosts. He took off his scarf, soft gray cashmere, and wrapped it gently around Theo's neck. The boy's small hands tightened around it like he was anchoring himself to something real. Julian typed again. "Let's get warm. Safe place. Close." Theo looked at the harmonica, then at Julian, uncertain. "Trust me," Julian said, voice low, calm. "We'll find her." He guided Theo under the overhang of a skyway entrance, its glass doors rattling with wind. Inside was a small alcove where heat leaked from the vents overhead. He brushed snow off Theo's coat and knelt beside him. The boy's eyes darted around, watchful, frightened, still scanning for the mother who wasn't there. Julian took another note on his phone. "Calling for help now." Theo nodded, then pulled the harmonica to his lips and blew softly. The sound barely rose over the wind, but the tone carried. Thin, high, almost defiant. 2 notes, then silence. Julian felt something tighten in his chest. He called city emergency services, gave his location, described the boy's hearing loss and condition. Then he texted his chief of security. Scan surrounding street cameras, legally. Check for any adult matching description. Female, early 30s, EMT uniform, last seen near Nicollet Mall. He hung up, realizing how strange it was. He, who built algorithms to predict city movement, now tracing one missing mother through snow by instinct. Theo's gloves were soaked through. Julian slipped off his own leather gloves and pressed them into the boy's hands. "Better?" Theo blew 2 faint notes again, his signal, the sound trembling in the cold air. Julian smiled. "Yeah," he murmured. "I hear you." Above them, the wind softened for the briefest second and the harmonica's echo floated through the glass corridor. Fragile, persistent, human. Julian watched Theo's face tilt upward, hope flickering behind frostbitten lashes. And in that sound, brief as breath, something inside Julian shifted, a realization he hadn't felt in years. He was still kneeling when his phone buzzed. Possible match. Warming Center, 2 blocks east. Julian rose, offered his hand. "Let's go find your mom, kid." Theo looked at the scarf around his neck, then at Julian's gloved hand and took it. Together they stepped into the storm, 2 silhouettes swallowed by the white. The wind cut sharp between buildings as Julian half-shielded Theo with his coat, guiding him through the maze of skyways that laced above the frozen streets. The glass corridors groaned with each gust. Their footsteps left a dotted trail of meltwater that refroze moments later. Julian's phone buzzed with a message from emergency services. Warming centers at capacity, rerouting aid. The world's smartest city, and it couldn't keep a child warm for an hour. Theo tugged his sleeve, pointing at a vending alcove ahead. Inside, a flicker of warmth and fluorescent hum. Julian let him in and crouched by the heater vent. He typed on his phone again. "Better?" Theo nodded, cheeks blotched red from cold. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the dented harmonica, and tapped it twice on his knee. Julian caught the rhythm. Steady, sure. "That's your signal, huh?" The boy couldn't hear him, but his mouth curved into a shy half-smile. He blew 1 short note, then traced letters in fog on the glass door. "Mom." Julian exhaled slowly. He texted his head of security again. No sightings yet of a woman matching Maya's description. A fresh message arrived. Street cams failing. Whiteout interference. Of course, even AI couldn't see through snow this thick. He looked at Theo, hunched small beside the vending machine glow. The boy's scarf, the one Julian had wrapped, had begun to frost at the ends. He peeled off his overcoat, draped it over Theo's shoulders. "We'll fix this," he murmured, not sure if he meant the storm, the system, or something deeper. He glanced at his phone. Nearby was a church basement marked as a temporary warming shelter. A short walk, if the cold didn't worsen. He knelt again, typed. "Found safe place. Let's walk there." Theo nodded, but looked uncertain. His eyes kept scanning the glass, catching shadows of strangers passing outside. Then he pulled from his pocket the folded paper bag Julian had seen earlier and showed it. Inside, still sealed, were the backup hearing aid batteries. Julian realized he couldn't replace them without a tiny screwdriver, something the boy clearly didn't have. Julian held up the bag. Then his phone screen. "We'll fix it together." Theo blew 2 soft notes of approval and tucked the harmonica away. They stepped back into the corridor. Snow hurled itself sideways outside, streaking the glass like sand against metal. A janitor passed, pushing a squeaky mop bucket, nodding with quiet understanding. That kid yours? Julian hesitated, then said softly, Tonight? Yeah. The man smiled, pushed on. By the time they reached the next intersection, Theo's pace had slowed. Julian scooped him up without asking, surprised at the lightness. Just bones, coat, and determination. The boy's head rested briefly against his shoulder. For a man who hadn't touched anyone without an agenda in years, the warmth was disarming. The church came into view, a simple brick building half buried in drifts. Lights glowed gold through stained glass distorted by frost. Julian carried Theo down the steps, shoulder first through the door. The burst of heat felt like sunlight. Inside, volunteers handed out cocoa and blankets. Cots lined the hall. A woman behind a folding table looked up. Name? Julian gestured to Theo. Theo Ellis, he said. Lost his mother. EMT, probably on duty near the freeway pileup. The volunteer nodded, radioing someone. Theo, clutching his harmonica again, stared toward the far wall. A commotion. An exhausted voice calling through the crowd. Theo? The boy's eyes went wide. He blew 2 piercing notes. A woman rushed forward. Dark hair tucked under a knit cap, EMT jacket salt-streaked and damp, hands cracked from cold. She dropped to her knees. Oh, God, baby. Theo threw himself into her arms, soundless sobs shaking his small body. Julian stepped back, exhaling the breath he'd been holding. Relief spread across his chest, slow and strange, like thaw. The woman looked up, tears streaking her wind-burned cheeks. You found him. He nodded. He was by the fountain. His hearing aid died in the cold. Her hands trembled as she brushed snow from Theo's hair. I was rerouted to a crash on I-94. I told him to wait near the station entrance, but the radios went down and... She swallowed. Thank you. Really. Julian smiled faintly. Just glad he's safe. Theo looked between them and lifted his harmonica again. 2 clear notes this time, bright against the hum of the shelter. Julian's gaze softened. In that small sound he heard something he hadn't in years. Life stripped of data. Raw and human. Maya cupped her son's face. You okay? Theo nodded, signing quickly with tiny hands. She answered, smiling through tears. Julian watched the exchange, realizing that for all his company's brilliance, AI that mapped the world's movements, nothing it had built could predict this. How 2 notes could cut through a storm and find their way home. He turned toward the door, ready to leave them in peace, when Maya's voice stopped him. Wait, what's your name? He hesitated, then said quietly, Julian. Julian Cross. She frowned, recognition flickering. Like, ether mind? He nodded, a small, tired smile. Guilty. Outside, wind howled against the doors again, but inside, the air had shifted, warmer, alive, as if something bigger than the storm had just begun. The church basement smelled faintly of cocoa, salt, and wool. Steam fogged the windows where cold glass met the breath of dozens of strangers finding warmth together. Theo sat wrapped in a thick blanket on a cot near the heater, his scarf still around his neck, cheeks flushed again with color. He blew a single clear note on his harmonica, light, almost tentative, and smiled when the sound carried. Maya Ellis sat beside him, holding his small hand. Exhaustion hollowed her features, but her eyes were alive with relief. Her EMT radio rested on the table, silent now, battery drained like everything else in the city. She turned to Julian. He must have been terrified. I can't believe he wandered that far. Julian pulled up a chair across from her. He was looking for you. He said your name without words. He nodded at the harmonica. That little thing led me to him. Maya managed a tired laugh. He made me promise never to lose him again, so we came up with signals. 2 taps or 2 notes means I'm okay. Her smile wavered. But today... I wasn't. The words landed heavy between them. Julian studied her hands. Red, cracked, a small cut bandaged near the thumb. You were out helping others. "That's my job," she said softly. "It doesn't stop because it's cold." He looked around the shelter, the cots, the flickering lights, the volunteers hauling crates of soup and bread. Systems fail fast when the weather turns. Battery life, transport, communication, it's all one thread. Break it, and people fall through. Her brow lifted, weary but curious. "You sound like someone who designs the threads." He smiled faintly. "I do. Ethermind builds AI for city logistics, resource mapping, emergency routing, predictive supply models." He gestured vaguely toward the blizzard beyond the window. "We're supposed to keep things like this from unraveling." Maya's tone was mild but edged with quiet skepticism. "Supposed to?" He didn't flinch. "Supposed to," he agreed. Theo looked between them, sensing tension he couldn't name. He tugged Maya's sleeve and signed slowly, "Hungry." She reached for the cocoa thermos and filled a paper cup, then handed one to Julian, too. "You look like you could use this as much as he does." He accepted it, the warmth seeping through his gloves. "Thanks." For a moment, they sat in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Theo sipped cocoa, fascinated by the steam, then pointed at Julian's wristwatch gleaming in the light. He touched his ear, then the watch, questioning. Julian smiled, unfastened it, and let Theo listen as it ticked close to his skin. The boy's eyes widened. "It sings," he whispered, almost inaudible, the first sound Julian had heard him make clearly. Maya's eyes shimmered. "He said it sings." Julian nodded, feeling something catch in his throat. "Then maybe it does." A volunteer passed by with a clipboard, mentioning incoming updates about closed roads and broken heating mains. Maya stood, instinct pulling her toward action. "I should check if they need EMT coverage here. Half the city's clinics lost power." Julian rose too. "I'll help however I can." She turned, surprised. "You? I thought CEOs just donate and disappear." He shrugged lightly. "Tonight, I'm a pair of hands. That's something." They worked side by side, she checking vitals of the elderly, he hauling crates and refilling heaters. Theo followed, his small steps echoing between their tasks, occasionally playing a note on his harmonica as if to remind them both that the world still held sound. Hours passed, the storm outside refusing to relent. Near dawn, the radio crackled to life again. Routes reopening, relief trucks deploying, hospital shifts resuming. Maya leaned against the wall, spent but calmer. "He should sleep soon," she murmured, looking at Theo curled under a blanket. Julian nodded. "You should, too." "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "If I rest, something always happens." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Then let someone else hold watch for a while." She glanced at him, uncertain whether to trust that kind of offer. The man in front of her looked like he'd never known sleepless nights or cracked hands. Yet his gaze wasn't pitying. It was human, steady. Theo stirred, murmuring something soft that even she barely caught. Maya brushed his hair back. "He said the watch still sings." Julian smiled faintly. "Then it means we're still alive." The shelter lights dimmed for the night shift. Snow pressed against the windows, but inside the air was warm, humming with the low murmur of shared exhaustion and quiet gratitude. Julian sat back, watching the boy breathe evenly between them, and felt something new settling inside his chest, a space he hadn't realized was empty until now. Outside, the storm began to ease, and the first light of morning found its way through the frost, touching the metal of his watch, the harmonica beside it, and the faces of 3 people who, for one brief night, had kept the cold at bay. By late morning, the storm had calmed to a fine, glittering fall. Snow still clung to traffic lights and street signs, but the air no longer howled. Inside the church basement, the world had slowed into small, deliberate motions. Volunteers pouring coffee, a radio murmuring updates, children bundled in donated coats readying to leave. Julian stood by the window, phone in hand, scrolling through system dashboards that painted a quiet disaster in data. Delivery routes down, heat grid outages, hospital supply delays. Each red dot was a failure that meant someone cold, someone waiting. He set the phone aside, frustration visible in the way he straightened his tie, a reflex he used when everything felt beyond control. Behind him, Theo was building a tower out of paper cups, counting silently with his fingers. Maya sat nearby, her fatigue softened by maternal calm. She looked up as Julian approached with 2 cups of coffee. "You don't have to keep helping," she said. "You've done enough." "I don't think that's true," Julian replied quietly. "You and your son showed me what my algorithms missed." She frowned, uncertain. "What do you mean?" He sat across from her, the metal chair creaking beneath his tailored frame. "We model crisis logistics down to the minute, but none of our systems factor in hearing aid batteries dying in the sub-zero wind chill or an EMT's radio freezing during a reroute. We fix the grid, but not the gap between people." Maya studied him, the immaculate suit, the watch glinting like a quiet heartbeat. "That's a good speech," she said finally. "But tomorrow, you'll go back to your glass tower, and people like me will still be patching up strangers in the snow." He met her eyes steadily. "You might be right, but maybe that tower needs new windows." Her expression softened despite herself. "That almost sounded human." He smiled faintly. "I'm working on it." Theo interrupted them, holding up his harmonica. He pointed to Julian, then signed slowly with both hands. "You play?" Julian laughed under his breath. "Not a note." He typed on his phone. "You teach me?" Theo's face brightened. He nodded eagerly and patted the spot beside him. Julian sat, awkwardly large among the blankets and paper cups, and took the small metal instrument when Theo offered it. "Like this," Maya said, gesturing. "He breathes in on the low notes, out on the high. It's all rhythm and patience." Julian tried, the first sound shrill and clumsy. Theo giggled, a sound he didn't quite hear but felt through his chest, his laughter visible in every line of his small face. The second attempt was softer, the third almost a tune. Maya watched, arms folded, a reluctant smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. "Not bad, Mr. CEO." Julian gave a mock bow. "For my next performance, I'll attempt not to freeze while playing." The radio crackled again, a newscaster announcing emergency aid updates. Maya's name came faintly through the static. EMT crews reassigned to reopened highways. Her shoulders tensed. "That's me. They'll need every hand." Julian nodded slowly. "And Theo?" "He stays home when I'm on call," she said, eyes flicking to her son. "Usually my neighbor checks in, but her power's still out." Julian hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I could help." Her head turned sharply. "Help how?" "I can make sure he's warm, connected, safe. I can find a way." Maya crossed her arms, weary guard rising again. "Mr. Cross, you're kind, but I've lived through favors with fine print. We're not a project." Julian's voice stayed calm, steady. "You're not. I just don't want the system's blind spots to hurt him again." Theo looked between them, sensing tension, then blew a soft note. One of the first signals he'd used in the plaza. The sound lingered in the air like a plea. Maya's defenses wavered. She brushed snow from her coat and sighed. "I know you mean well. Just don't make promises you can't keep." Julian nodded. "Fair." A volunteer called for departures. Transport vans were ready to take families home. Julian helped carry Theo's small duffel bag up the stairs. Outside, daylight reflected off snow in blinding sheets. He turned to Maya one last time. "If you ever need anything, replacement batteries, safe transit, a warm place, call me. No strings." She looked at him for a long second. "I'm not good at asking for help." He smiled faintly. "Then just knock twice. I'll understand." Theo blew 2 bright notes in farewell, the signal that had started it all. Julian lifted a gloved hand in return as mother and son walked toward the van. He stood there for a while, snow melting on his shoulders, watching the taillights disappear. Something in him had shifted. a quiet recognition that not every rescue could be built from code. Some required staying when the storm was over. As he turned toward his SUV, his phone buzzed again, not with board updates or stock alerts, but with a notification from his research team. Subject: Community Data Pilot. Volunteer input needed. Julian stared at it, thumb hovering, then smiled. For the first time in years, he pressed Join. 2 days later, the blizzard finally broke. Minneapolis emerged half-buried and blinking in pale sun. Snowplows groaned through the streets, carving narrow corridors between mountains of ice. In Ether Mine's sleek downtown headquarters, the heat hummed back to life, and Julian Cross returned to the boardroom that felt colder than any winter wind. The table stretched like a frozen lake, 12 directors on one side, his reflection gleaming across polished black glass. They were mid-discussion when he entered. Words like liability, brand optics, and quarterly optics bounced between them. He listened without expression, fingers resting lightly on his prestigious watch as the second hand swept time in quiet defiance. "Julian," said Meredith, his CFO, "the press caught wind of your shelter appearance. A few photos surfaced. It's trending, CEO among storm victims. Very humanizing, but risky." He didn't blink. Risky? They'll frame it as optics, not empathy. Investors don't like unpredictability. He leaned forward, voice low. Empathy isn't unpredictable. It's necessary infrastructure. We just forgot to model it. The room stilled. His tone wasn't sharp, but it carried a weight that silenced the rustle of suits. Meredith recovered first. "You're proposing—" "I'm building a prototype," Julian said. "An adaptive platform for cold weather aid, routing warmth, not just freight. Predictive battery supply for hearing aids, oxygen pumps, medical devices, emergency micro-shelter mapping. AI doesn't need more data. It needs compassion baked into code." Someone muttered, "That's philanthropy, not profit." Julian's blue eyes lifted, steady. "They don't have to be opposites." No one argued. They just looked at him, uncertain if this was a midlife crisis or the start of another empire. When the meeting ended, he stepped into his office. The skyline outside was silver and white, sunlight flashing off the river's cracked surface. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and stared at his reflection in the glass. Still the same man, but something underneath had thawed. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Theo's hearing aid battery died again. Stores sold out citywide. Any leads?" He typed back without thinking. "Give me 20 minutes." Within 10, he had his procurement manager on a call. "Divert one supply shipment from Boston to Minneapolis. Hearing aid batteries, size 312, 5,000 units. I'll cover the cost. Distribute through clinics and shelters first." The manager hesitated. "Is this personal?" Julian looked at the skyline, snow clouds reforming. "It's human." That evening, he drove himself to the Ellis apartment complex, a modest 3-story brick walk-up, still half frozen around the gutters. He climbed the stairs carrying a small bag, new rechargeable batteries, a pair of heated ear wraps, and a thermos of cocoa from a cafe downtown. Maya opened the door, surprise flickering into caution. "Mr. Cross?" "Julian," he corrected gently. "Just Julian." Theo ran forward, barefoot in the thick socks, harmonica in hand. He blew 2 cheerful notes, their signal. Julian grinned. "Hey, maestro!" Maya stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in before you freeze." The apartment was warm, but worn. Patches of ceiling plaster peeled above the radiator. Toys, textbooks, and EMT manuals filled the corners. Julian set the bag on the table and crouched beside Theo, showing him how to replace the new battery pack. The boy's eyes widened when the light blinked green. Sound returned in a soft rush. Maya crossed her arms. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." He looked up at her. "I didn't do it for credit." Her gaze flickered to the label on the battery case. Ethermind Labs. Or Control? He winced slightly, realizing the brand name had betrayed him. No, I ordered them personally. No company data, no strings. She exhaled, tension still visible. I've seen your type, Mr. Julian. You mean well, but people like me end up being case studies for people like you. He nodded, quiet. You're right to be cautious. I crossed a line before I even knew where it was. Theo glanced between them, sensing friction. He blew a single soft note, uncertain. Julian smiled faintly at him. It's okay, Theo. Adults argue differently. It's like snow falling inside. That earned the first ghost of a smile from Maya. You talk like you've rehearsed apologies. I've had practice, he admitted. But this one's real. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, it's been a long week. You helped us once. Maybe let that be enough. He nodded, though something in his eyes said it wouldn't be. Understood. He turned to leave, but at the door, Theo tugged his coat. Play, he said softly, offering the harmonica. Julian blinked, then smiled, took it, and played two wobbly notes that somehow landed true. Theo clapped, beaming. Maya shook her head, half exasperated, half amused. You're impossible. Julian shrugged lightly. Maybe, but I'm trying to learn. He handed the harmonica back, nodded once, and stepped into the cold night. Snowflakes spun around him like static. Behind him, a faint tune floated through the apartment window. Theo's harmonica, brighter now, as if the storm had finally loosened its grip. Julian glanced up at the sky and whispered, We'll fix the thread. Then he walked toward his car, unaware that his good intentions had already crossed a line he couldn't see. That night, the city fell into a deceptive calm. Streets plowed but still rhymed in frost. Sky the dull silver of exhaustion. In Julian's penthouse overlooking the river, the lights of downtown blinked like faraway signals, steady and cold. He sat at his desk, scrolling through the Ethermind Analytics dashboard. The new emergency module, his compassion algorithm, was already pulling real-time data, outage clusters, shelter usage, medical battery demand. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like silence. He opened another screen, one marked Ellis Family, Authorized Welfare Audit, Brief. Just 5 entries: address verification, employment record, medical note about Theo's hearing condition, and a time-stamped logistics order for the replacement batteries he'd sent that morning. Legal, minimal, nothing invasive. And yet, as the snow reflected against the glass, Julian stared at that file and realized he had still crossed a line. He had turned people, Maya and Theo, into a data set. The next morning, Maya arrived home from a night shift at the emergency response unit to find Julian's sleek black SUV parked again on the curb. He stood by her stoop, coat buttoned, a paper bag in one gloved hand. "Another delivery?" she asked, crossing her arms. He smiled faintly. "Just coffee. No files, no signatures." She hesitated, but the scent of roasted beans and winter air softened her resistance. She gestured toward the stairs. "Come in before it freezes to your hand." Inside, Theo sat at the table, coloring a picture of the skyline, towers glowing under a snowfall. He waved when he saw Julian, then signed "Play," and pointed at the harmonica. Julian chuckled. "You're a tough teacher, kid." Maya leaned against the counter, still studying him. "You didn't have to check in." "I didn't," he said simply. "I wanted to." She arched a brow. "That's what makes it complicated." He met her gaze. "I know. That's why I came to apologize properly." He set the paper bag on the table. "I asked my team to research the root causes of aid gaps after the storm. I didn't ask their permission to look into you. I was trying to help, but it was wrong." Her expression shifted, guarded, but listening. "You mean that?" "I do." He exhaled. "I built my life on systems that fix problems by predicting behavior, but people don't fit models." "You reminded me of that." She studied him for a long moment. You're not used to saying sorry, are you? He smiled wryly. Only in earnings reports. A quiet laugh escaped her before she could stop it. That's tragic. Probably, he agreed. Theo broke the tension with a bright chirp from the harmonica. He pointed between them, eyes alight, then signed, "Friends?" Maya glanced at Julian, caught between laughter and reluctance. He's faster at forgiving than I am. Julian crouched beside Theo, smiling. That makes him smarter than both of us. The boy grinned, pleased, and went back to drawing. Maya poured herself coffee, then one for Julian. You said your company's fixing those aid gaps. What does that actually mean? He took a sip before answering. We're launching something called Ether Warm. It's a public access AI that maps neighborhood heating outages and connects donors directly to repair or supply needs. No middlemen, no red tape. Her brows lifted. That's huge. It's overdue, he said. Then, quieter, and it's because of you two. Maya blinked. Us? He nodded. Theo's hearing aid. The batteries, the harmonica, that signal in the storm. It all made me see what the system forgot to listen to. You reminded me technology should start with human stories, not spreadsheets. She looked away, flustered. You don't have to put our names on anything. I won't, he said quickly. This isn't a headline, it's a course correction. For a moment, neither spoke. The apartment was small, but the silence wasn't empty. It hummed with the low rhythm of trust trying to rebuild itself. Finally, Maya asked, You ever stop to breathe, Julian? He tilted his head. What do you mean? You talk like you're always chasing the next fix. Maybe that's why you keep freezing yourself out. He didn't answer right away. Then softly, maybe I forgot how to thaw. The words hung between them, unexpected and too honest. Theo tugged his mother's sleeve, showing her his drawing. A skyline with bright windows, a figure in a blue suit, and another smaller one with a harmonica. He pointed proudly at Julian. That's you. Maya smiled. I see that. Julian looked at the picture and felt a flicker of warmth he couldn't quantify. He rose, adjusted his coat. Thank you, for the coffee, and for letting me try again. As he reached the door, Maya spoke quietly. Julian? He turned. She hesitated, then said, You don't have to keep fixing us, just keep showing up like a person. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Outside, the snow had softened into drizzle. Julian walked to his car, the harmonica's faint echo trailing behind him through the open window. 2 notes, steady, forgiving. He didn't see Maya watching from the doorway, her expression caught between suspicion and something gentler, something that almost looked like belief. The following evening, the city glowed under a pale winter dusk. Meltwater trickled through gutters, refreezing in glimmering ribbons, while clouds thinned enough for the moon to ghost above the skyline. Julian sat in his penthouse kitchen, the one no one ever cooked in. It was all marble and symmetry, beautiful but lifeless, a showroom of absence. He'd never noticed how quiet it was until Theo's laughter had echoed there in his imagination all day. He turned the lights down and looked at the long counter. It should have been warm, smelling of cocoa, steam, life, but instead it reflected the sterile glow of the city. His hand rested on the cold granite when his phone buzzed. Maya. Pipe burst at our place. Heat's out again. They said repairs could take a few days. We'll figure it out somehow. Julian didn't think twice. He typed back. I'm sending a car. Stay where you are. Maya. No, thank you, but we'll manage. I don't want charity. He replied, It's not charity, it's safety. Then another text. Please trust me this time. No response came for a full minute. Then finally, only until repairs are done. For Theo's sake. No photos, no posts, no strings. Julian smiled slightly. Agreed. 20 minutes later, his sleek black SUV pulled up outside the frozen brick walk-up. The streetlight flickered weakly over snowbanks stained with slush. Maya stood there bundled in her EMT jacket, a duffel at her side, Theo leaning sleepily against her leg, harmonica clutched tight. Julian opened the car door himself. "You both look half-iced. Come on." Maya hesitated before climbing in. Theo yawned, mumbling, "Cold." Julian draped his wool coat over the boy's knees. "Not for long, kiddo." When they arrived at Julian's home, the warmth hit immediately. Soft air, faint scent of cedar and coffee. Maya looked around, eyes wide. The space was open and quiet. Walls of glass overlooking the half-frozen river. "Wow," Theo whispered. His small voice barely echoed. Julian smiled gently. "Welcome to the ice castle. Let's make it a home tonight." He showed them the guest suite. Heated floors, soft blankets, a fireplace that flickered at a tap. Maya set Theo's duffel down, clearly uneasy. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," Julian replied, "but I want to." She folded her arms, still holding the last bit of pride like armor. "Just until the repairs are done." "Just until then," he promised. Later, while Maya settled Theo with cocoa, Julian went to the kitchen. This time, not for data calls or digital distractions, but to actually cook. He pulled open drawers he barely knew existed, searching for pots and pans still wrapped in factory plastic. Theo wandered in, curious. "You cook?" Julian laughed. "Define cook." He held up a can of soup. "I can heat things. That's a start." Theo giggled, the sound filling the tall room. "Mom cooks better." "I believe that," Julian said, pouring soup into a pot. A few minutes later, the smell of tomato and basil filled the space. The boy perched on a stool, tapping his harmonica gently against the counter like a metronome. Julian found himself humming to the rhythm, soft and off-key. When Maya appeared in the doorway, her expression shifted at the sight. Julian stirring soup, Theo laughing, steam rising into the lamplight. It was domestic, absurdly ordinary, and yet something about it felt like warmth rediscovered. "You're full of surprises," she said. Julian looked up. "Good ones, I hope." She shrugged lightly. "The verdict's still out," he smiled. "Fair enough." They ate at the counter, 3 bowls steaming between them. Theo talked mostly through signs and short words, his eyes bright with energy even as the hour grew late. Maya looked more relaxed than Julian had ever seen her, shoulders no longer drawn tight from constant vigilance. After dinner, Theo labeled the kitchen drawers with the tiny tactile dots from his hearing aid kit. "So I don't forget where things go," he said. Julian watched, touched. "That's genius." Maya smiled, her voice quiet. "He likes order, makes the world feel smaller." "Then maybe we're alike," Julian murmured. Theo finished the last drawer, then blew 3 cheerful harmonica notes that echoed off the marble walls. For the first time, Julian's home didn't sound hollow, it sounded alive. He glanced at Maya, who was watching her son play. Her face softened, the edges of fatigue melting into something gentler. When she looked up, Julian's eyes were already on her. "Thank you," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Don't. Just stay warm." That night, long after Theo had fallen asleep near the fire, Julian stood at the window with a glass of water, watching the snow settle over the river. Behind him, the soft sound of Maya humming drifted from the guest room, a simple tune that carried like the harmonica's echo. He closed his eyes, listening. The city lights reflected faintly on the glass, and for the first time in years, Julian Cross didn't feel alone in his own house. The next morning broke clear and sharp, sunlight scattering diamonds across the frozen river. Inside Julian's lakefront home, warmth radiated softly through the floors. For once, the glass walls didn't feel like barriers. They felt like light. Julian woke to the faintest sound, the harmonica. Theo was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, blowing a slow tune that drifted like breath through the quiet. Maya was beside him, hair tied back, one hand steadying a mug of cocoa, the other helping him adjust his hearing aid headband. When she noticed Julian watching from the hall, she smiled, tired but genuine. "Morning. He's been up since dawn." Julian chuckled. "I've never heard a better alarm clock." Theo waved at him, then pointed toward the kitchen. Pancakes? Julian blinked. Pancakes? Maya laughed. It's his weekend tradition. Usually I burn them. He grinned, loosening his tie. He'd half-dressed for a board meeting before remembering the snow had delayed it. Then let's try not to set off the smoke alarms today. Half an hour later, the kitchen smelled of batter and warmth. Julian had discovered that flipping pancakes required more courage than launching an AI product. Theo sat on the counter, counting each flip and clapping whenever one didn't land folded in half. Maya leaned on the doorframe, laughing quietly. You're not bad at this. He gave a mock bow. CEO of Chaos. Don't tempt fate, she said, smiling. When breakfast was done, Theo arranged the plates like a small conductor organizing his orchestra. He handed Julian a pancake shaped vaguely like a heart. For you. Julian blinked. That's surprisingly symbolic. Maya rolled her eyes. He's generous with compliments. Don't get used to it. But there was warmth in her teasing now. A shift, subtle but unmistakable. Later that morning, Julian took a call from his hospital contact in the den. He spoke quietly, pacing beside the fire. The North Star Sound Grant. Yes, process the first disbursement under the Community Fund, anonymous donor listing. He paused. Yes, start with pediatric cases like Theo Ellis. Prioritize winterized accessories, therapy support, travel coverage. When he hung up, he felt both nervous and certain. It wasn't a publicity move. He wanted it clean, unbranded. The work had to stand on its own. He stepped back into the living room where Maya was folding laundry. She looked up, sensing something different in his face. Good news? He hesitated. Just something I needed to set right. Theo ran up with his drawing pad, eager to show off. On the paper, 3 stick figures, one tall with glasses, one with long hair, and a small one holding a harmonica. Above them, he'd scrawled, Warm House. Julian crouched beside him. That's us? Theo nodded proudly. Yes. Maya's lips parted, emotion flickering in her eyes. He never includes anyone outside us before, she said softly. Julian smiled. Then I'm honored. As afternoon light mellowed to amber, a knock sounded at the door. Maya frowned, wiping her hands. 2 reporters stood outside, cameras ready. Ms. Ellis? One called through the glass. Is it true you and your son are staying with Ethermind's CEO? Julian was beside her in an instant. Don't answer. She froze, the moment dredging up the same instinct that had kept her guarding every corner of her life. Privacy, dignity, survival. Julian stepped outside before she could protest, closing the door behind him. This is private property. Leave them out of your stories. The reporter smiled thinly. You've got quite the heartwarming narrative, Mr. Cross. The public loves a redemption arc. Julian's voice was even but cold. Then write one about your own industry first. He returned inside, jaw tight, brushing snow from his coat. Maya watched him carefully. They'll spin whatever sells. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'll keep you out of it. She looked uncertain. Can you? He hesitated, then nodded. I can try. That evening, the 3 of them sat together near the fireplace, a fortress of warmth against the world outside. Theo leaned against his mother's shoulder, half asleep, harmonica resting in his lap. Maya glanced at Julian. He trusts you, you know. Julian met her gaze. I don't take that lightly. You shouldn't, she said softly. Trust is rare for him, for both of us. He nodded, voice low. Then I'll earn it. The flames flickered against the glass, reflecting the 3 of them like faint silhouettes. Imperfect, fleeting, but together. Maya exhaled, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than before. You really believe this can work, don't you? Technology fixing what people broke? Julian's expression softened. No, but I believe people can fix what technology forgot. She smiled faintly, that guarded warmth finally breaking through. Maybe that's the same thing. Theo stirred, murmuring something drowsy. His hand reached out between them, small and certain. Maya took it first. Then Julian did. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft this time, quiet enough to hear the faint metallic hum of the harmonica on the table. And for a few breaths, the storm outside and the one inside both felt like they were learning how to end. Before dawn, the world was reduced to white again. The snowfall had returned overnight, thick and silent, covering even the footprints they'd left on the deck. From the window, Julian watched plows crawl through the streets below, their orange lights flickering like distant beacons. Behind him, he could hear soft movement, the shuffle of socks on hardwood, a faint whistle of breath. Theo was awake, sitting by the fire, the scarf Julian had given him draped loosely around his neck. His small hands toyed with the harmonica, the metal glinting in the glow. Julian crouched beside him. "You're up early." Theo looked at him, signing carefully. Nervous. Julian frowned. "About what?" The boy hesitated, then wrote in his sketch pad, "Hospital today." Julian's chest tightened. "The surgery." Maya entered the room, still buttoning her uniform jacket. She'd slept barely 3 hours. Her hands trembled as she poured coffee. "They moved up his slot. A last-minute cancellation at Mayo. We leave in an hour." Julian nodded slowly, already pulling on his coat. "I'll drive." "You don't have to." "I want to," he said quietly. "You shouldn't do this alone." The drive to Rochester was a blur of white fields and gray sky. Snow hissed beneath the tires, the world outside reduced to ghostly shapes. Trees bent with ice, road signs swallowed in frost. Inside the car it was quiet except for the heater's steady hum. Theo sat in the back seat, watching the horizon, clutching his harmonica. Occasionally, he blew a note, soft, short, a heartbeat of sound against the silence. Maya glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "He plays when he's scared," she said softly. Julian nodded. "I get it." She looked over. "You?" He smiled faintly. "I work when I'm scared. Same impulse, different tool." Her lips twitched in something like a half smile. "So, what are you doing now?" "Trying to listen," he said. That answer made her go quiet again. By the time they reached the hospital, dawn had broken into a pale wash of color. The parking lot gleamed under floodlights. Snow blew in small, glittering eddies across the pavement. Julian carried Theo's overnight bag while Maya guided her son by the hand. The boy's grip was firm, steady despite the tremor of nerves he tried to hide. Inside, the hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter coats. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. At the intake desk, the nurse recognized Maya. "Ellis, pediatric auditory implant prep, right on time." Julian waited while they checked in. When Maya turned, her face was drawn but determined. "You don't have to wait here all day." He met her eyes. "I'm not leaving." Her throat worked as if she might argue, but she didn't. "Okay," she whispered. In the pre-op room, Theo sat on the narrow bed while a nurse prepped his IV. His harmonica lay beside him on the blanket. When Julian stepped in, Theo pointed at his scarf. Julian's scarf, the same one from the night they met. He pressed it into Julian's hands. "For luck," he whispered. Julian smiled, but his voice wavered. "I'll keep it safe." Maya bent to kiss her son's forehead. "You'll hear everything soon," she murmured, voice shaking. "Even the wind." Theo looked at her, then at Julian, and signed, "Okay, brave." When they wheeled him toward the operating room, Maya followed until the double doors swung shut. Then she stood still, her hands trembling. Julian stepped beside her, unsure if he should speak. Finally, she exhaled and leaned back against the wall. "I thought I'd be used to this," she whispered. "Hospitals, surgery, uncertainty. But it's different when it's yours." Julian's hand brushed hers, tentative. "Then let me wait with you." They sat side by side in the waiting lounge, hours stretching thin. Outside the window, snow drifted like ash, endless and slow. Neither spoke much. The quiet became its own language, the sound of hope refusing to dissolve. When the surgeon finally appeared, time seemed to hold its breath. "The procedure was successful," he said gently. "He'll need rest and gradual calibration, but the implant is secure." Maya's knees buckled with relief. Julian caught her before she fell. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping free. "He's okay," Julian said softly. "You did it." She looked at him through the blur. "No," she whispered. "We did." Hours later, in recovery, Theo lay propped up on pillows, his face pale but peaceful. A bandage circled behind his ear. He stirred when he saw them, then reached weakly for his harmonica. Maya stopped him gently. "Not yet, honey. Rest first." Julian placed the scarf beside his bed, folded neatly. "For luck again." Theo smiled, small and brave. Maya sat on one side of the bed, Julian on the other. For a long while, they just watched him breathe. Steady, safe, whole. The storm could rage outside all it wanted. In here, the world had finally gone still. When Theo drifted back to sleep, Julian whispered, "You know, when this started, I thought I was rescuing him. Maybe it was the other way around." Maya's voice was low, full of quiet conviction. "That's how love works. It rescues in both directions." The snow kept falling outside the hospital windows, soft and unhurried, like time remembering how to be gentle. 2 days later, the storm had passed. The sky was a fragile blue, one of those Minnesota mornings that looked calm but still bit at the skin. In a private hospital room, sunlight pooled across white sheets where Theo lay awake, blinking against the brightness. His head was still bandaged, the implant just beneath. A nurse had turned on the calibration device an hour ago, guiding him gently through the first steps. The faintest hum reached his ears, a world of sound reborn, delicate and strange. Maya sat beside him, holding his hand. Julian stood a few steps back, afraid to move, as if sound itself might shatter. Theo flinched slightly, then smiled, his eyes widening. "Mom," he whispered, hoarse, tentative but real. "I hear you." Maya froze, a sob catching in her throat. "Oh, sweetheart." She leaned close, her voice trembling. "You can hear me?" Theo nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "You're loud." She laughed through tears, pressing her forehead to his. "Good. I'll try to be quiet." Julian swallowed hard, blinking fast. He turned slightly toward the window, letting the light mask the emotion tightening his face. The nurse stepped out, leaving the three of them in a bubble of quiet awe. Theo looked toward Julian then, squinting a little. "Mr. Cross?" Julian turned. "Yeah, buddy?" The boy pointed at Julian's wrist. "Your watch." Julian blinked, surprised. "What about it?" "Let me hear." Julian hesitated, then slipped it off. He held it close to Theo's ear. The second hand ticked, a sound most people never noticed, but now it was music. Theo grinned, eyes bright. "It sings," he said softly. Maya covered her mouth, whispering, "He remembers." Julian smiled faintly, his voice catching. "Yeah, kid, it's singing." Theo lifted his harmonica from the bedside table and placed it against Julian's hand. "You play?" Julian chuckled. "I'm terrible at it." "Try," Theo insisted, grinning. So he did, just a single, shaky note. It came out low and warm, filling the sterile room with something human. Theo's face lit up like sunrise. Maya leaned back in her chair, wiping her eyes. "You've officially lost your excuse, Mr. Cross. You can't go back to being the cold tech genius now." Julian set the harmonica down gently. "I don't think I want to." Their laughter lingered in the air, fragile but steady, like something newly built. Later that day, the hospital discharged Theo with a long list of post-op instructions and therapy appointments. Julian handled the paperwork while Maya packed their things. When she returned to the lobby, he was waiting with 2 cups of cocoa. "You bribing hospital staff now?" she teased. "Just you," he said, handing her one. She took a sip, then looked around at the sterile white hallways. I hate hospitals, always have. They hold too much of everything. Hope, fear, loss. It all lives in the same air. He nodded slowly. I used to think data was the clean version of life. Numbers, certainty, logic. But it's just the quiet version. You don't hear the heartbeat until you walk into rooms like this. She tilted her head. You really think you can change how a company listens? I can try. His voice softened. And I can start by listening to you. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, longer than it should have. Then she smiled, small and tired, but genuine. Then listen to this. Theo's hungry. Pancakes. Julian laughed. Deal. The drive back to Minneapolis was calm this time. Clear skies, plowed roads, sun glinting off the snowbanks like glass. Theo sat in the back seat, humming faintly to himself. Occasionally he'd tap the harmonica, testing how sound vibrated through his fingers. Every time, he smiled wider. Maya glanced in the mirror, her expression soft. He's already learning how to hear again. It's incredible. Julian nodded, one hand steady on the wheel. You gave him the chance. She turned to him. No, Julian, you did. He shook his head. I just connected the dots. You gave him the courage. The truth hung between them, simple and luminous. Back at Julian's home, Theo ran straight to the window overlooking the lake. The ice was breaking, small fractures glinting where water shimmered underneath. Look, he said, pointing. It's singing, too. Maya laughed. You think everything sings now? He nodded proudly. Because it does. Julian watched them from a few steps back, mother and son framed in winter light, laughter filling the house. For the first time, his walls didn't echo emptiness. They echoed life. Maya turned, catching his gaze. He's going to want lessons soon, she said. On what? Music? Maybe both kinds, she said, smiling. The kind you play, and the kind you live. Julian's chest tightened, warmth spreading slow and sure to. Then I guess I'd better start practicing. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. You already are. Outside, sunlight scattered on the lake's melting crust, each shimmer a note in an invisible song. Inside, Theo picked up his harmonica again and played 3 bright tones that carried through the room like a promise. And when Julian looked up at Maya, neither of them needed words to understand what they were hearing. Something like hope, something like the beginning of a new season. By the end of the week, the storm's aftermath had shifted from chaos to curiosity. The city had thawed enough for news vans to return, and the story of Ethermind's mysterious community initiative had begun circulating online. No one knew the full truth, only whispers. AI CEO funds secret relief network. Tech mogul turns disaster into empathy experiment. Julian read the headlines from his office window, jaw tight. The problem wasn't that people were talking, it was how. They speculated, distorted, romanticized. No one saw the real story, a mother, a boy, and a harmonica that had saved a life in the cold. His phone buzzed again, his publicist. Julian, the press wants comment on this Etherworm project. You're trending nationally. He exhaled. Let it trend. Just don't feed it. They're asking if this family, Maya and Theo Ellis, are your inspiration. Are they part of some pilot? He turned from the window, voice calm but steel-edged. They're not a story. And if anyone publishes their names, I'll sue for privacy violation. The line went quiet. Understood, the publicist said. Julian hung up, running a hand over his face. He'd promised Maya, no publicity, no exposure. He intended to keep that promise. Still, he knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. At home that evening, the tension felt heavier than the weather outside. Theo was doing speech exercises by the fire, pronouncing new words as Maya coached him softly. Julian tried to act normal, pouring tea, helping with worksheets, but his mind kept drifting to the storm brewing online. When Maya noticed, she paused mid-lesson. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. He hesitated. "You'll see it soon anyway." Ethermine's relief platform went public. The media's twisting it. Her shoulders stiffened. Twisting how? They're calling it a PR stunt, a redemption campaign. Some think I created it to clean up my image. Maya's eyes narrowed. "And what happens when they find out about us?" "They won't," he said quickly. "I made sure every record's sealed." She didn't look convinced. "You can't algorithm your way out of human gossip, Julian." He rubbed his temples. "I can try to shield you." "Maybe that's the problem," she said softly. "You always try to fix things from above. Sometimes people just want to be seen, not saved." Her words cut deep, more truth than accusation. Theo looked between them, sensing the tension but not understanding it. He reached for his harmonica and played two slow, uncertain notes. The sound was fragile, like a peace offering. Maya smiled sadly, brushing his hair. "It's okay, baby. Grown-ups just forget how to listen sometimes." Julian's throat tightened. He crouched beside Theo. "She's right. I forgot." The boy blew one soft note, an answer. Later that night, Julian sat in his study, laptop open to a blank post-draft. He stared at it for minutes, then began typing. Not a statement, but a confession. Ether Warm wasn't born in a boardroom. It began with a lost boy in a snowstorm, a harmonica, and a city that forgot how to hear. "I didn't save him. He, and his mother, reminded me what technology is for. This isn't PR, it's atonement. To those still out there in the cold, I see you." He read it twice, then hit publish. No press release, no taglines, just words. Human ones. By morning, his post had gone viral, shared not by tabloids but by ordinary people, EMTs, parents of hearing-impaired kids, shelter workers. The comments weren't about scandal or spectacle. They were thank yous. Maya saw it while sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at him across the kitchen table. "You wrote that?" "I did," he said quietly. She nodded slowly, her voice gentler now. "It's honest. It's overdue." He hesitated, then added, "I used no names, no photos. Just the truth." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Then maybe you got it right this time." Theo looked up from his cereal, hearing the faint tremor of emotion between them. "You famous now?" he asked, grinning. Julian chuckled. "Something like that." The boy nodded solemnly. "Then don't forget the music." Julian blinked. "What music?" Theo raised his harmonica, blowing 3 clear notes, bright, hopeful, his own little anthem. Maya smiled. "That one?" Julian felt something stir in his chest, a quiet, steady pride. "I won't." That afternoon, he announced a new division within EtherMind. Ether Warm Public Access. A completely open-source platform that allowed anyone, engineers, volunteers, parents, to contribute improvements. No patent walls, no profit margins. At the press briefing, reporters asked endless questions, but Julian's final statement silenced the room. "We're done treating empathy as a feature. From now on, it's our foundation." He walked off stage without another word. Back home that night, he found Maya and Theo in the living room, the fireplace glowing low. Theo was sketching again, this time a small drawing of 3 figures standing on a frozen lake, sunlight breaking overhead. At the bottom, in uneven letters, he'd written, "We 3." Julian looked down at it speechless. Maya smiled softly, meeting his gaze. "He says it's our family now. Trial period, of course." Julian laughed quietly, voice thick. "A fair contract." Theo looked up and grinned. "No strings." Julian knelt, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Deal." Maya glanced at the window. Snow had begun again, gentle, quiet, almost musical. Inside, warmth filled every corner. The thaw came slowly that week. Sidewalks wet with meltwater, icicles breaking loose in glittering shards. Minneapolis was learning to breathe again. So were they. Julian drove Maya and Theo to the lakeside path near his home that afternoon, a rare pocket of calm between press calls and hospital follow-ups. The snow along the trail had turned to slush, the air soft with the smell of pine and thawing earth. The world felt fragile, temporary, but alive. Theo ran ahead, harmonica in one hand, scarf trailing like a small flag behind him. Each time he turned back, he signed, "Come on!" with an enthusiasm that made both adults laugh. Maya's cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "He's going to fall in the lake one of these days," she said, smiling as Theo hopped from one patch of ice to another. Julian chuckled. "He's learning balance. That's what life is, right? Controlled chaos." Spoken like a man who's never tripped in his own hallway. "Once," Julian admitted, "but I blamed the flooring vendor." She laughed, a sound he hadn't realized he'd been missing until now. For a few minutes they walked in companionable silence, footsteps squelching in the soft snow. The lake stretched beside them, patches of open water glinting like glass, the ice groaning faintly as it receded. Maya stopped suddenly, looking out over it. "You ever think about how something frozen can still move underneath?" He followed her gaze. "All the time." She turned to him, her voice quieter. "Julian, about all this?" She gestured vaguely toward the horizon, the city, the world that had somehow tied them together. "I need to be honest. I'm grateful, but I'm scared too." He nodded slowly. "Because this feels bigger than us. Because I've built my life around things that break," she said. "Machines, bones, hearts. You fix them for a while, and then the next storm comes." He didn't look away. "Then let's build something that doesn't pretend to be perfect. Just something that endures." She smiled faintly, sad and warm all at once. "You really think that's possible?" "I think that's what love is supposed to be." Maya exhaled, her breath a ghost in the cold air. "Love," she echoed softly, as if testing the word. Julian's eyes met hers, steady, unguarded. Not a fairy tale, not rescue, just showing up, even when it's messy. She looked away toward the lake again, blinking fast. "You don't make small promises, do you?" "I don't know how to anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of Theo's harmonica drifted back to them, 3 notes, uncertain but brave. Maya smiled through the quiet. "He's still figuring out his song." Julian watched the boy, his voice barely a whisper. "So am I." She turned then, meeting his gaze. "Maybe we all are." They started walking again, slower this time. Theo spotted a patch of reeds poking through the snow and ran ahead, crouching to listen to the faint crackle of ice beneath his boots. Maya's expression softened. "You know, he's been drawing you lately. In every picture you're holding his hand." Julian's heart caught. "That's a good habit to start." "It is," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "You've changed him. He trusts people again." He hesitated. "And you?" Maya glanced at him, eyes steady now. "I'm still learning." He nodded, accepting that truth as the only one that mattered. "Then I'll give you space to learn. No pressure, no expectations." "Grants aren't promises," she said softly, echoing their earlier boundary. Julian smiled faintly. "Then this isn't a grant. It's a beginning." Ahead, Theo blew a bright, ringing note. Turning toward them with both hands raised high. "We 3!" he shouted, voice echoing across the lake. Maya froze, eyes glistening. He's never said that out loud before. Julian felt the words strike deep, 3 small syllables that made every frozen part of him melt a little more. He crouched down, arms open. "We 3," he repeated. Theo ran into him, laughing, scarf whipping in the wind. Maya stood there for a heartbeat longer, watching them, then walked forward and joined the embrace. For the first time since the storm, all 3 of them stood together. No company, no charity, no secrets. just people finding warmth in a world still learning how to thaw. The lake groaned softly as ice broke near the shore. Maya looked up at Julian, her voice barely audible. "You really believe in second chances?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Only because I found mine." Theo squeezed both their hands, then blew his harmonica again, 3 perfect notes that rose into the clear afternoon air. Somewhere behind them, the city hummed with life, unaware that a promise had just been made on a thawing lakeshore, not a vow of perfection, but of presence. Julian looked at Maya and whispered, "We'll take it one winter at a time." She nodded, eyes bright. "That's enough." The sun dipped low, turning the snow gold around them, and for the first time the cold didn't sting. It simply settled, quiet and forgiving, over a family that was learning how to be one. Spring came to Minneapolis as if the city itself exhaled. Snowmelt coursed through storm drains, streets filled with puddles that caught reflections of blue sky, and the air smelled faintly of thawed iron and new beginnings. At Ether Mind headquarters, sunlight streamed through glass walls once known for their sterility. Now, the lobby buzzed with life. Students touring the new accessibility lab, engineers testing winterized headbands and audio devices, community workers reviewing the EtherWarm dashboard. Screens displayed live maps of heating networks, mobility routes, and battery aid requests, each dot a life warmed, a promise kept. Julian stood in the center, coat draped over his arm, tie loosened. He'd just returned from a site visit at one of the clinics. The change wasn't just in the building, it was in him. His eyes no longer had that restless edge. His posture still carried confidence, but the kind softened by purpose rather than power. His assistant approached. "Media's still requesting interviews about EtherWarm's impact. Do you want me to set one up?" Julian smiled faintly. "Tell them it's not my story to tell. The results speak for themselves." She nodded, understanding, and left him with the quiet hum of progress. He looked up at a large framed photo near the entrance, a winter street shot taken months ago, a boy in a puffy coat holding a harmonica. No names, no caption, just light catching breath in the cold. He traced the frame lightly with his fingers, remembering the night everything began. Then he turned and headed out into the new season. Across town, Maya and Theo were finishing their afternoon at the community center. Theo's speech therapy had become part of a broader program, funded anonymously, though she knew who was behind it. The walls were bright with children's artwork, laughter echoing down the hallways. Theo adjusted his hearing band, blinking against the noise. "It's loud," he said, grinning. Maya knelt. "That's life, sweetheart." He nodded, taking out his harmonica. "Then let's play it." He blew a soft, sure tune, notes rising and falling like conversation, imperfect but beautiful. The therapist smiled, clapping along. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling gratitude pulse in her chest. That evening, Julian met them by the lake where the ice had finally surrendered to open water. The path was muddy, reeds bending in the wind. He wore a simple gray sweater instead of his usual suit. Even his watch looked less like a symbol now and more like a keepsake. Theo spotted him first and ran, scarf trailing. "Julian!" Julian caught him easily, laughing as Theo's harmonica clattered against his chest. "You get taller every week," he said. Maya approached, tucking her hair behind her ear. "You look different." Julian smiled. "You mean human?" She chuckled. "Something like that." They walked together along the shoreline, Theo darting ahead to skip stones. The city shimmered across the lake, windows glowing warm against the fading light. Maya glanced at him. "I read the new report. Device failure rates dropped by half this winter. That's huge." "It's a start," he said. "We built something that listens before it speaks, kind of like Theo taught me." She nodded. "He changed you." "He reminded me," Julian said quietly, "that control isn't connection." She smiled. "So what's next, Mr. visionary. He looked out at the water. No more building walls of glass. I want to design warmth. Maybe it's not about expansion anymore. It's about integration. Accessibility by default. You really mean that? I do. He paused, then turned to her. But that's the professional answer. The personal one is simpler. Her brow lifted. Which is? He smiled softly. Dinner with you and Theo. Every week. No agenda. She laughed. That's your master plan? That's my life plan. Theo ran back toward them, waving a small drawing he'd made on the back of an old receipt. 3 stick figures again, himself, Maya, and Julian, standing under a wide blue sky. Above them, in uneven handwriting, home. Julian crouched to look closer. You keep drawing this, he said. Theo nodded seriously. Because it's true. Maya looked at the drawing, then at Julian, her voice barely above a whisper. It really is. They stood there a long time as the sky turned pink, the lake breathing softly at their feet. Later, back at Julian's house, the harmonica hung beside the front door on a small wooden hook, a bell of sorts. Each time someone entered or left, it chimed faintly against the wall, a reminder that sound and silence could coexist, that love could be as steady as a heartbeat and as simple as listening. Theo curled up on the couch, reading aloud, his voice still halting, but growing stronger with each word. Maya sat beside him, resting her head against Julian's shoulder. Outside, the last snow of the season melted quietly along the eaves, the rhythm of water against stone, like music. Julian watched the reflection of his small family in the window, 3 shapes framed in golden light, and thought of the word that had followed him through every storm. Connection. It no longer meant networks or systems, it meant them. He reached for Maya's hand and whispered, You know, I used to think perfection was the goal. She smiled without opening her eyes. And now? Now, he said, glancing at Theo asleep between them. I just want us to stay warm. The harmonica swayed gently as a breeze passed through the open window, releasing a single soft note that lingered in the quiet, a signal, a promise, a song that didn't need words. And in that sound, in that home of light and laughter, winter finally ended.